in this video I will be addressing the wage gap and the information that I've gathered. So you often hear people say that women make 77% of what men make, or 78 or 79. I've heard all of those, and it may have changed over time. So I admit that I haven't done very rigorous research, but I will link my sources in the description. And I will show that the wage gap that is commonly cited, the 79%, I think, is not due to discrimination, that other factors also play a role. The entire wage gap may be explained by different choices women and men make. And I'm not saying discrimination never happens, but if it happens, it's certainly not as widespread a problem as many feminists make it out to be. So the 79 or 78 or 77, I'm going to go with 79, statistic come from the US Census Bureau, and it's for men and women working full-time. So according to Wikipedia, companies commonly require from 32 to 40 hours per week to be defined as full-time and therefore eligible for benefits. Full-time status varies between companies, often based on the shift the employee must work during each work week. So anywhere from 32 to 40 hours. So it's for instance, a man might work 40 hours full-time and a woman only 32, and that would lead to a higher wage, but they would still both be working full-time. So there's an interesting video on YouTube called "Why Do Men Make More Than Women?" Dr. Warren Farrell. And Warren Farrell is a guy who has done some research on the wage gap. So I think that started with him basically asking the question, if employers know that they can get away with paying women less for the exact same job, then why don't they only hire women? Because they will save more money on that if they only hire women. So that's a question that I also have been thinking about, and I haven't really heard any feminists answer that yet. If there was widespread discrimination, and employers know that they can get away with paying women less, then they should only hire women so that they can save money. So he decided to do some research and discovered that there were 25 work-life choices that men and women make that are different. Now, I don't know exactly all of these choices, and the video does unfortunately not contain the studies or the sources in the description. So you can take it with a grain of salt, but I haven't heard a feminist rebuttal to this, or to his book, basically, where he talks about the same thing. I think it's called The Myth of Male Power. And I think that if what he says is completely false, then the feminists should have already rebutted it a long time ago, but I haven't found any rebuttal by a feminist. But I'm going to talk a bit about what he says in the video, and then you can go watch it yourself. I will link it in the description. And yeah, I'm open to hear, different views on it. But I think everyone who still thinks that men and women earn less for the exact same work should watch that video, because he explains very detailed the different factors that are involved. So this is basically what he says in the video. Even when it comes to the same job, there are other factors that are involved. For instance, experience, the hours worked, and the subspecializations. So for instance, you have statistics that compare doctors to doctors, and it seems that like the same job, but there are different subspecializations within that job. Men are more likely to be cardiologists or surgeons, and women are more likely to be general practitioners, and cardiologists and surgeons always make more, regardless of gender. So I found this paper from 2009 called An Analysis of Reasons for the Disparity in Wages Between Men and Women. I will link it in the description. So the entire paper is 93 pages long, so it's very long, and I have to admit that I only read about half of it, but the summary is sort of in the beginning of it, and I will be reading some of the summary. During the past 3 decades, women have made notable gains in the workplace and in pay equity, including increased labor force participation, substantial gains in educational attainment, employment growth in higher paying occupations, and significant gains in real earnings. However, despite these gains, the raw wage gap continues to be used in misleading ways to advance public policy agendas without fully explaining the reasons behind the gap. The purpose of this report is to identify the reasons that explain the wage gap in order to more fully inform policymakers and the public. There are observable differences in the attributes of men and women that account for most of the wage gap. Statistical analysis that includes those variables has produced results that collectively account for between 65.1 and 76.4% of a raw gender wage gap of 20.4%, and thereby leave an adjusted gender wage gap that is between 4.8 and 7.1%. These variables include a greater percentage of women than men tend to work part-time. Part-time work tends to pay less than full-time work. A greater percentage of women than men tend to leave the labor force for childbirth, childcare, and elder care. Some of the wage gap is explained by the percentage of women who were not in the labor force during previous years, the age of women, and the number of children in the home. Women, especially working mothers, tend to value family-friendly workplace policies more than men. Some of the wage gap is explained by industry and occupation, particularly the percentage of women who work in the industry and occupation. Although additional research in this area is clearly needed, this study leads to the unambiguous conclusion that the differences in the composition of men and women are the result of a multitude of factors, and that the raw wage gap should not be used as a basis to justify corrective action. Indeed, there may be nothing to correct. Differences in raw wages may be almost entirely the result of individual choices being made by both male and female workers. I have to say though that here it mentions part-time work, but of course the wage gap of 79% of what men earn is for full-time work. So I thought I mentioned that. Since I didn't read the entire study, if there's something important you think that I missed, then please write it in the comments. Finally, I would like to talk about reports of wage discrimination. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any reports or any statistics when it came to the United States, which is really bad. You should be able to find out that, but I wasn't able to find it out. So I took Swedish statistics instead. So we have a lot to talk about the wage gap here in Sweden as well. And people claiming that it's because of discrimination and those kinds of things. But what I want to mention is that in Sweden about half of the population works, and we're about 10 million people, so that's about 5 million people working. And I asked to get the statistics for wage discrimination from the last decade, and I got them. So here are the statistics. Here are all the reports of discrimination that has come from 2009 to 2018, and here wage discrimination is included, but not all of them are necessarily wage discrimination. It's also worth mentioning that it doesn't say which sex it is against, so it could be wage discrimination against men as well. It only says how many reports of discrimination that have come in. So the reason why it's 137 in 2013 is because a lot of people reported both their employers and their union. So that's why there's so many. And as you can see, after that, it has drastically gone down. So only a couple of reports every year. So if wage discrimination was such a widespread issue, I wonder why there are not more reports on it. Especially if it's something that everyone is aware of. I've heard people say that, every woman that they know or something that they've seen wage discrimination everywhere they've been, basically. And if it's really such a widespread issue, then why are there so few reports on it? Of course, the United States may be different again, and I couldn't get the statistics. If you can find them, that I would be happy. But it's worth considering that Sweden has a working population of 5 million, and still there are not a lot of reports coming in every year. So it doesn't seem to be a widespread problem, and if it is, it's quite surprising how few report it, because you can do that. If you get paid less just because you're a woman, you have the right to report it, since it's been illegal since, I think, the 60s. I don't know exactly the year. I think like 64 or something like that. So yeah, if you get discriminated against, you can report it, since it is illegal. So I think in conclusion we can say that the wage gap of 79 cents to $1 is accurate if you look at like all full-time workers, but it doesn't it's not because of discrimination, which some feminists claim. And it's worse, if you're going to, study this wage gap and talk about the wage gap, you should first look at all the different factors that are involved, not just how much men and women earn on average, but also experience, how many hours worked, what hours they work, and different subspecializations within different jobs, and how much time they take off maternal leave and those kinds of things. So all of that you need to look at if you're going to find out what the real wage gap is. Also, even when there is a tiny wage gap, it's not certain that it is because of discrimination, because there is the argument that men are more assertive and demand a higher wage for their work, which may very well be true and contribute also to the wage gap. But I will end this video here. I'm sorry for my less than perfect articulation. I hope I will get better at it in the future. Leave your comments in the description. Subscribe if you want to see more. In my next video I will be talking about the biological differences between male and female brains. Hit the bell if you want to be notified when I upload a new video.